So welcome to our webinar on handling your bounces and complaints with Amazon Simple Email Service. I'm Jen Steele, and I'm the Product Marketing Manager for Amazon SES. I'll be co-presenting with Rohan Deshpande, one of our developers and the author of the awesome Amazon SES blog post on this topic. Chris Wheeler, our lead technical program manager, will be joining us at the end of the presentation to handle your questions. Today we have a pretty simple agenda. To make sure we're all on the same page, I'll go through a brief overview of Amazon SES and how to get started. Then Rohan will jump into handling bounces and complaints. Finally, I'll briefly go through our support resources, and then the team will be taking your questions. What is Amazon Simple Email Service? We are a cloud-based email sending service. You can pay as you go. We don't require any long-term commitment, minimum spend, or negotiation, and we have the reliable, redundant Amazon infrastructure. We're built to require little to no infrastructure on your part, which will allow you to scale your email sending quickly and easily. So let's take a look at how SES works. A client application acting as an email sender makes a request to Amazon SES to send email to one or more recipients. If the request is valid, Amazon SES composes an email message based on the request parameters and then queues it for delivery. The message is routed over the internet to the recipient's internet service provider, which then delivers the message to the recipient's inbox. If the recipient's email address does not exist, the ISP sends a bounce notification to Amazon SES. The service then forwards the notification to the sender. That notification can be forwarded via email or via Amazon Simple Notification Service, and Rohan will show you how to set that up in just a few minutes. A recipient who does not want to receive the message can register a complaint with their ISP by clicking on their spam button. An ISP which chooses to set up a feedback loop then sends the complaint to Amazon SES, and we then forward it to the sender. Again, that notification can be forwarded via email or via Amazon SNS. I want to take a moment to talk about Amazon SES pricing. We have a flat rate of 10 cents per 1,000 email messages. As I mentioned earlier, we don't have any minimum commitments or subscription fees. We do charge for data transfer out, but your first gig each month is free. If you choose to send email with attachments, the attachments are billed separately at 12 cents per gig. And like many AWS services, we do have a free tier. If you are an Amazon EC2 user, you can send 2,000 messages each day for free when you call SES from your EC2 instance directly or through AWS Elastic Beanstalk. We have a fair number of customers who operate entirely within this free tier. As I said before, I want to make sure we're all on the same page about how to get started with Amazon SES. So I'll review these briefly: how to sign up, verification, and look at how to send a test email. Then I'll go through our sandbox and how to request production access, and finally talk about the different ways to send email via Amazon SES. We will be getting to handling bounces and complaints. I just want you all to see where it fits in the context of Amazon SES. First, you need to sign up for AWS if you don't already have an account. You can get started with any of our services in a matter of minutes. When you first have an AWS account, you'll be in the Amazon SES Sandbox, where you can only send to or from verified email addresses or domains, and you have a testing quota of 200 messages per day. Really, the Sandbox is where you're making sure you can get set up. You know you're in the sandbox by the big yellow box at the top of your Management Console window here, or if your sending quota is only 200 emails per 24-hour period. Your next step is to verify a new sender, a domain or email address. You'll need to verify any email address or domain you want to use to send email through SES. This is the from address. You verify email addresses by clicking on a link in an email that we send you, and you can verify a domain by adding a text record to its DNS. You initiate both processes from the verified sender's part of the Management Console in the appropriate tab. You can send a test email in several different ways, via the SMTP endpoint, by calling one of two different API actions, or here, via the Management Console. To send from the Management Console, you select the email address or domain from which you want to send the test email, click the Send a Test Email button, and fill out the form to send that email. As I said before, right now we're in the sandbox. Let's talk about what that means for sending your test email. When you're in the sandbox, you can only send from or to verified email addresses. Basically, you can only email yourself. You have other limitations as well. You have a tiny quota. You can only send 200 messages per day, and you can only send 1 message per second. We have the sandbox here so that you can run a proof of concept. It's a testing environment. The production environment looks very different. When you're in the production environment, your quota will be 10,000 messages per day and will continue to rise as you send your production email through Amazon SES. You'll also see your TPS continue to rise as well, although you start at 5. And while you can still only send from verified email addresses and domains, you can send to any email address in the world. You'll need to request production access in order to see the benefits we saw on our last slide. Again, you can see that you do not have production access as long as you only have a 200 message per day quota and you have that big yellow box at the top of this window. To request production access, click on the Request Production Access button. Clicking this button will take you to the Amazon SES Production Access form. Please fill it out completely. Production access requests take up to 1 business day to process, and if our team has any questions for you, we will get in contact with you. Please note that we will be looking at production access for the account you're currently logged into. If you have multiple AWS accounts, make sure you're logged into the correct one before filling out this form. It will automatically fill in the email address associated with the logged in account, so you can double check it that way. Once we have processed your request, we will send you email confirmation to the primary address of that AWS account. However, if you don't regularly check that account, there is a way to easily tell whether you have production access. Just check the Management Console or call the GetSend Quota API. A quota of more than 200 messages per day means that your production access has been granted. As you can see in this view, we've moved up to a production quota of 10,000 messages per day, and the big yellow box asking you to request production access or verify a new sender is gone. When your Management Console looks like this screenshot, you can send email to any email address, no recipient verification necessary. You'll still need to verify any new sender address or domain through the same process we looked at before. Once you have production access, you should start sending your production email through Amazon SES. By sending as much of your production email as you can through the service, you'll find that your sending quota will increase naturally. Our final getting started step is to send email and grow your quota. We offer several different ways for you to send email via Amazon SES, and you should use whatever is easiest to integrate into your systems. You can send via our SMTP interface or through one of 2 different API actions, send email and send raw email. Once you have integrated your systems into Amazon SES, you will start to see your quota grow if you send your production email through and send as much of your quota as possible, as I mentioned earlier. If you cannot naturally ramp or your quota does not grow fast enough to meet your needs, you can manually request a higher quota via the Extended Access Request form. I've included a link to that form above, and you can also get to it right from your Management Console, as we'll see later in this presentation. Now I'll hand this over to Rohan. He will deep dive into handling your bounces and complaints.
Thank you, Jen. Hi, everyone. My name is Rohan Deshpande, and I am a developer on the Simple Email Service team. In this section of the webinar, I would like to talk about why you should handle bounces and complaints and how you can configure Amazon SES to publish bounces and complaints using SNS. Then I will describe the main components of the bounce and complaint JSON messages. And finally, we will walk through a real-world implementation of the bounce and complaint feedback system. So why should you handle bounces and complaints? Bounces and complaints have a direct impact on your Amazon SES reputation. If your sending behavior generates bounces and/or complaints over a certain threshold, your account will be subject to enforcement actions. It may even be shut down. As we've talked about on the SES blog, good sending generates less than 5% bounces and complaints typically. Amazon SES provides you with bounce and complaint metrics in the console and via API calls. You should also handle bounces and complaints to improve the quality of a mailing list. Over time, a mailing list becomes stale. Handling bounces and complaints will improve the quality of your list by removing invalid addresses. This will also reduce your costs for sending through SES and ensure you are only sending to customers that want your email. Finally, it will help you keep customers happy. A complaint is a notification from the customer indicating that they do not want your mailing. If you promptly remove them from your list, you keep customers happy and increase the likelihood that they will come back to use your service. This next slide, I would like to talk about the Amazon Simple Notification Service and why we picked it as the transport to deliver bounces and complaints. Some background first. Amazon SES forwards raw bounce and complaint messages from the recipient's ISP to the return path indicated in the email. However, the language, encoding, and bounce format variations make it non-trivial to process bounces and complaints. We heard you loud and clear and looked at various approaches to provide you with a standard representation of these messages. We chose SNS mainly because it is an extremely simple platform to integrate with. SNS pushes notifications to you via email, SMS, or HTTP. It can even write to an Amazon SQS to provide durability so that you do not miss notifications. Amazon SNS provides the same level of reliability as the rest of the AWS platform. Finally, Amazon SNS is extremely cost-effective. If you sent 10 million messages per month and had a 5% bounce rate, it would cost you an additional 24 cents per month. When you enable bounce and complaint notifications via SNS, SES will parse the raw bounce and complaint messages from ISPs. It will create JSON objects that represent the bounce or complaint. It will determine if the bounce message is a permanent or temporary bounce. And finally, it will publish the JSON message to your SNS topic. Now let's walk through configuring SNS so that we can use it with Amazon SES for bounces and complaints. We will create separate topics for bounces and complaints. This makes it easier to isolate notifications from each other based on the notification type. Log on to the AWS Management Console and navigate to the SNS console and then to the SNS dashboard. Then click the Create New Topic button in the middle of the screen. In the Create Topic dialog that pops up, type in SES-bounces-topic as the topic name. Then click Create Topic. You can see that SNS has created a topic for receiving bounces from SES. Repeat the process and create another SNS topic called SES-complaints-topic to receive complaint notifications. Now that you have your topic set up, we need to create transports to receive notifications. So let's subscribe a transport to the bounces topic. A transport is the method by which notifications will be delivered to you. For the purposes of this webinar, we will use email as the transport. Later on, I will show you how to build a real-world system to handle bounces and complaints. From the console, select SES-bounces-topic and click Create New Subscription. On the Create Subscription dialog that pops up, change the protocol to email and type in an email address for the endpoint. Then click Subscribe. Amazon SNS displays a confirmation dialog indicating that it sent a message to the email address that was defined as the endpoint. This is to ensure that the email address is valid and confirm that the recipient requested notification delivery to that address. Click Close and check the recipient's inbox. Here's a sample subscription message, a subscription opt-in message from Amazon SNS. Click the link that says Confirm Subscription. This will take you to the SNS website, and you get a confirmation page indicating that the email address has now been subscribed to receive notifications from the SES-bounces-topic. If you navigate back to the SNS dashboard and click refresh, you will see subscription information for the bounces topic. Repeat the process for the complaints topic. Subscribe another email address to receive notifications for complaints. As you can see from the screen, you should now have one subscription per topic. We are now ready to configure SES to publish bounce and complaint notifications through SNS. In the AWS Management Console, navigate to the Amazon SNS tab and then go to the Verified Senders in the pane on the left. Select a verified identity. In this case, I am selecting an email address. In the lower pane, click the Feedback Details tab. This tab shows you the bounce and complaint configuration for that identity. The email feedback forwarding status indicates if raw bounce and complaint messages will continue to be forwarded to you from SES. The possible values for this option are enabled and disabled. The bounces SNS notification indicates the SNS topic that is selected to deliver bounce notifications. And similarly, the complaints SNS notification indicates the SNS topic that was selected to deliver complaint notifications. Feedback configuration is defined per identity, and there is no inheritance. For example, if you have a verified domain named example.com and a verified email address, user@example.com, the feedback configuration for the domain and email address are separate and distinct. On the screen, click Edit Configuration. The Edit Notification Configuration dialog lets you select SNS topics for bounces and complaints. You can also choose to disable forwarding for raw bounces and complaints from SES. Select SES bounces topic from the drop-down list for bounces, and then select SES complaints topic from the drop-down list for complaints. For now, we will keep email feedback forwarding set to enabled because we are testing the feature. We can set this to disabled once we are comfortable with the SNS bounce and complaint notifications. Click Save Config to proceed. The feedback details pane now displays the SNS topics that SES will use to notify you when bounces and complaints arrive for that identity. One more note. When you set up an SNS topic to receive bounces and complaints, Amazon SES will publish a subscription succeeded message for that feedback type. This lets you confirm that you are indeed receiving messages from SES for that particular topic. Here's a sample subscription succeeded message for my topic. At this time, you have successfully configured SES to publish bounce and complaint notifications to you via SNS. Let's quickly talk through some common error conditions that we have seen. On the Edit Notification Configuration dialog, if you do not specify an SNS topic, the configuration dialog will prompt you with a topic ARN cannot be empty error message. This means you need to specify an SNS topic either by selecting it from the drop-down list or typing it in the SNS topic ARN text box. Another common error we've seen is when you specify an invalid SNS topic, the dialog will prompt you with an error message indicating the topic is invalid. The dialog checks to make sure that the SNS topic you specified is valid, and that it has access to write to that topic. In the future, at any point, if you decide you do not want to receive notifications via SNS, you can come back to this dialog and change your bounces and complaints topics to no SNS topic. Amazon SES will automatically switch you back to receiving feedback via email. As always, you can also configure these options via the API. We have defined 3 new API actions to set up your notifications. Get identity notification attributes retrieves the bounce and complaint topic configuration for an email address or domain. Set identity notification topic sets the SNS topic to use for bounces and complaint notifications for an email address or for a domain. Set identity feedback forwarding enables or disables raw bounce and complaint forwarding from SES to the verified identity. You can read more about these in the Amazon SES API reference. Now let's take a look at the JSON messages. This is a sample bounce JSON message. The notification type attribute indicates if this is a bounce or complaint notification. Bounce type indicates if this is a permanent or transient bounce. We will talk about the possible bounce types in the next slide. The bounce subtype provides more details about the bounce. SES maps ISP-specific bounce codes to bounce subtypes to simplify the customer experience. We will continue to evaluate ISP bounce notifications and update the bounce subtype list as appropriate. The current list of bounce subtypes is available in the SES Developer Guide. Bounce recipients is a list of email addresses that the message could not be delivered to. The bounce code and other diagnostic information will be included per recipient if it is available. And finally, you can use the message ID to identify the original message that was submitted to SES. SES categorizes bounces into 3 distinct types: permanent, transient, and undetermined. Permanent indicates that you should not send to this recipient anymore. The ISP bounced the message because of a fatal error. For example, the email address did not exist. Transient indicates a temporary error delivering the message. Depending on the bounce subtype, you may retry sending to this recipient after some amount of time. This bounce could be caused because the recipient's mailbox is full. Undetermined indicates SES does not know if the bounce is a permanent or a transient bounce. In this case, you should manually review the bounce information and proceed accordingly. Here's a sample complaint JSON message. The notification type field indicates if this is a bounce or complaint notification. The complaint recipients is a list of email addresses that indicated that they did not want the message. Sometimes ISPs redact the email address of the customer that complained. In this case, SES will look up the original message based on the message ID, and if the message has multiple recipients, SES will select recipients that belong to that ISP's domain and list them in this field. And again, message ID is a unique identifier that you can use to look up the original message. Now let's talk about a real-world use case on how you can use bounces and complaints to manage your sending. The scenario is that you have an email list in a data store and you send emails daily through SES using a sending application. Every campaign generates a small number of bounces and complaints, and you would like to keep your mailing list automatically updated so that you do not send to these customers anymore. The new SES bounces and complaints notification feature sounds great. You want notifications to collect in a queue since you do not need to process them real time, and you're okay as long as they are processed before the next campaign is generated and sent. Since you need to persist notifications, you elect to have SNS published to an SQS queue. Your bounce or complaint processor can read notifications from this queue and update the master data store. You set up bounce processing using the new feedback notifications feature using SNS and SQS. In this case, you have SES use SNS to publish to an SQS queue, and a bounce processor will run at some scheduled time, read messages off the queue, and update your mailing list. You also set up complaint processing using SNS and SQS. You then set up the bounce processor to read from the bounces queue and the complaints processor to read from the complaints queue. These applications are set up to run only before a campaign is about to be created. So now, your daily sending process looks like the following. Run the bounce processor to check for bounces in the queue and remove those addresses from your list. Run the complaint processor to check for complaints in the queue and remove those addresses from your list. Generate your campaign with the updated data list, and finally, send via SES. And now you have fully automated the management of your mailing list. I also want to quickly touch on how you should implement code for bounce handling. Amazon SES can and will add new bounce types in the future. You should try and implement your code so that new bounce subtypes will be handled safely in a default manner. The sample code on this slide always removes any recipients that generate a permanent bounce from the mailing list. For transient bounces, it is explicitly checking for the attachment rejected bounce subtype, and it removes those messages or those recipients from the mailing list. Every other subtype is handled by the default clause in the switch statement, which sets those messages to be manually reviewed and processed by a human. With this approach, any new bounce subtypes that are not handled by a code will fall into the default case and will be submitted for manual review. Jen will now continue with the rest of the webinar.
Great, thank you, Rohan. So I'm going to talk briefly about our support resources, and then we'll take your questions at the end. Don't forget to type your questions into the question dialog box in your GoToWebinar pane. As I review the support resources, I'll go through our documentation, our forums, our extended access form, and our blog. We have 3 different resources in our documentation for you, and you can get to these via the documentation link on the SES homepage, which is at aws.amazon.com/SES. The first piece of documentation is the Amazon Simple Email Service Getting Started Guide. This guide will walk you through the getting started steps that I showed you earlier in this webinar. It'll walk you through in a little more detail. The second is the Amazon Simple Email Service Developer Guide. This guide gives you all of the detail you will need in order to set up your system to send email through Amazon SES. The third is the Amazon Simple Email Service API reference. This reference contains all of the Amazon SES API calls, parameters, and data types you can use. Next is the Amazon SES Forum, which I particularly enjoy. You can get to this via the Community Forum link on the SES page or via your Management Console. Here you'll find all of our product and feature announcements, but I have to admit that's not what I find most interesting. Here is where SES users ask and answer questions about the service. You'll also find many members of the Amazon SES team on here, often answering people's questions. We read your posts on here, whether or not we answer, and we take your questions, concerns, and suggestions very seriously. In fact, your suggestions and concerns led directly to the development of these bounce and complaint notification features via Amazon SES that we've just talked about in this webinar. I also want to discuss how you increase your sending limits, as I mentioned earlier in the webinar. If you send production email through Amazon SES after you gain production access, your quota should naturally increase to meet your business needs. Sometimes, however, there are business events that make natural ramping impractical. To handle those cases, please click on the Request Increase Sending Limits link in the Management Console. This will take you to the Amazon SES Extended Access Request form. We use the information you enter into this form to make sure that you have the quota you need for your business. Please fill out this form completely and let us know why you will need a manual quota increase and to what level. You might have a big launch coming up, or your Facebook game is showing signs of going viral. Please try to give us a good idea of exactly what your quota will need to be, whether it is in daily volume or in emails sent per second, so that we can make sure that we put you in the correct tier. Please note that this request usually takes 1 business day to process, so you will want to plan ahead. If we require more information in order to process your request, someone will get in touch with you. Please note that we will advise you of your request results in an email that will be sent to the email address associated with that AWS account. And of course, you can always check your quota through the Management Console or through the GetSendQuota API call. In the console, you can see your quota, how much of it you have used, and your maximum send rate. When your quota is increased either naturally or via a manual adjustment, you can see it right here. We maintain our own blog for Amazon SES, and we update it weekly with announcements, best practices, how-tos, explanations, and code samples. We'd love for you to come comment and tell us what you think of it, as well as let us know what kind of posts you would really like to see. So that's handling your bounces and complaints with Amazon SES. We tried to build the features that we thought you would find most useful, and your initial feedback has been really great. If you want to tell us what you think or request any features, please visit our forums and tell us. As I said before, your input directly influences our product development. We love you guys, we love our customers, and we really want to make sure that we're developing features to meet your needs. So now I will turn this over to Chris and Rohan to answer some questions.
Thanks, Jen. This is Chris Wheeler. I want to thank everyone for attending the presentation today. Hopefully you're finding it as useful as we are. Rohan, we have a question here from Lionel from Switzerland, and he asks, how does he get real-time bounce notifications, and how does he set that up?
Hi, Lionel. So SES publishes notifications to your SNS topics whenever we receive them from ISPs. You can always write a process that polls your SNS topic or your SQS queue if you have one subscribed, or you can have SNS publish notifications to an HTTP endpoint so you can get them in a real-time manner.
Thanks, Rohan. We have another question from Todd asking about the shutdown functionality within SES. So if you send mail that is considered to be low quality in excess of the limits that SES has, then your SES account will be disabled. However, that disabling is only limited to your SES account. It does not affect any of the other statuses with the other services in AWS that you may use. And just as a follow-up, SES does take email quality very seriously, and to protect all of our customers' outbound mail at the ISPs, we have to ensure that only the highest standards are being applied to outbound mail. If for some reason you do send mail that is, triggers enforcement on the SES side, you will receive an email at the address that's listed on your AWS account. So please be sure to check that email address regularly and make sure that you don't miss any important information that's being sent to you via email from the SES team. I have another question here from Jonathan asking, when you set up a new SES service and you are still in the sandbox, are you only able to send email to verified addresses? That is correct. As Jen mentioned, the sandbox is actually a state where it serves a proof of concept functionality for you. You go in, use all of the different features that SES has to offer, very easy setup and instant access to the service. In fact, every new AWS account has access to the sandbox from SES. If you want to send email to any recipient, not just the email address domains that it lives on, then you'll need to request production access. And going down the list here, Rohan, got another question for you. Validation from or validation of the SNS endpoint for bouncing complaints is assuming that the IAM credentials of the logged on user are there. Are there any plans to include an IAM user drop-down input field so that access to the SNS endpoint can be pre-validated within the admin console?
Thanks, Chris. That is a great question, and it's definitely an interesting use case. We have not planned to add any IAM drop-downs to the configuration yet, but we will definitely take this back, discuss it with the team, and determine if this is a feature we want to support.
Great, and thanks, Stephen, for the question. Rohan, got another one for you. We have a lot of excitement here around SNS integration with SES, so that's fantastic. Can SNS be configured to send a notification to a callback URL that I expose in my application?
And the answer is yes. SNS actually does support subscribing an HTTP URL as an endpoint. When you can go through the same steps that SES publishes a message to your SNS topic, SNS will forward that by invoking your HTTP endpoint.
Great, and thanks for the question, Dimitri. I have one here from Chance for you, Rohan. When will you start including reply to addresses in your SNS endpoint notification messages?
That is, again, a great question. Again, I do not have a definite timeline, but we will definitely take this back and look into what it would take to implement this feature. Thank you for the question and the interesting use case.
Great. Got another question from Dimitri here. What is the bounce policy that SES imposes on bounced emails? And then he follows it up with saying, I noticed at times that I would get an address is blacklisted error from SES while I know the address is valid. And that's definitely a good question. The bounce policy that SES has is anytime we see programmatically that an email address's ISP, the hosting service that owns that email address or facilitates an email address, responds back with a hard bounce of a persistent mailbox type, we will add that email address to our blacklist, our internal blacklist. And we've had some internal discussions around this, and we're hoping to have some better clarification around the labeling of what we call blacklisting. There are actually two, excuse me, two blog posts that mention go into detail around what blacklisting is in terms of email addresses and with ISPs. But specifically to answer your question, if you email an address that returns a hard bounce for a persistent mailbox error, we will put that email address on a blacklist for 14 days. Now, if you know that address actually does exist and can receive mail, maybe the ISP generated a transient hard bounce, then you can reach out through the forum or through premium support and request that an SES or AWS team member manually remove that email address from the blacklist, or you can just wait 14 days for that address to automatically roll off, and then you'll be able to email it again. I got another question here from Juan. Technically, what does a complaint mean? Fantastic question. And in the world of email, there are several things that an ISP being an email provider or hoster such as a Yahoo or a Gmail or a Hotmail, etc., there's several things that they use to determine the quality of the mail coming into their network. One is bounces, and then the other one is this notion of a complaint. And so when a recipient, an email recipient, goes into their web, the icon says this is spam, or sometimes it's represented by a little flame. That will actually move that message into the bulk folder on the recipient system. Additionally, behind the scenes, that triggers, if the ISP participates in something we call back loop, we will forward it along, letting you know that a customer has complained about one of your messages, meaning that they considered the experience with that message to be spammy. And then that's the information that we provide you either through the SNS integration enabled as well. And like Rohan discussed, it is a good idea to watch your complaints and to not send to customer recipients rather who are complaining about your mail, because those complaints will add up at the ISP over time. And if the ISP sees too many of those, then they will take that as an indicator that you're sending low quality mail. Rohan, I got another one for you from Chance. Do you have any plans to add reforwarding of custom X headers via SNS endpoints? And he goes into more detail. I set an X header denoting which machine a particular email address was sent from, and I'd like to get that information back through the SNS endpoint.
Great question. Again, this is not a feature that we have planned to implement yet. We're still looking into, we're definitely looking into adding some kind of header information to the JSON messages that we send back through SNS. I do not have a timeline, but we will, again, discuss this and plan it out and figure out when we can implement this.
Great. Many thanks to both of you for taking care of these questions. And that wraps up today's presentations. Thanks to everyone for attending today's webinar. You will receive a follow-up email with a link to this recorded presentation. I also encourage attendees to periodically check the webinar section of aws.com to see listings of other upcoming webinars or virtual events, as well as recorded webinars and other videos. On behalf of Amazon Web Services and our presenters, thank you for joining us today to learn more about Amazon's simple email service.